Gaza. I fought in Gaza. When we speak about the principles of war, these are the IDF principles of war, not media-oriented, but the real principles of war, how we conduct, how we train our officers, and how we, the principles by which we fight. And they're very much true to media operations as well. You definitely want to maintain the initiative. You want to have a clear aim of your goal. You want to make sure that your efforts are effective. And you want to safeguard yourself. And a few other things that are true in combat as they are in media. And I'll try to make a few examples of how they are done in our current operations. Now, a little bit about the current security situation. This is 2011. The Middle East, and I'm sure that there are many people in the room with far more knowledge about the Middle East than I have, but the map or the fault lines of the Middle East, the borders, the countries, in 2011 we had sovereign countries all around us, and of course Syria had full control of its borders then. Hezbollah was already then a very strong political force in Lebanon and the biggest military threat to Israel at that time as well. But Syria had a military that was capable of maneuvering into Israel and posed a significant threat to a military threat to Israel. Iraq was intact, more or less, and we had full Egyptian control over Sinai, no real terrorist entities here, and as you all know, and we very much cherish, peace agreements with Jordan and Egypt. Gaza was under its 4th year of Hamas rule, probably not a nice place to live, but nowhere near as horrible as it is today. If we fast forward, and I am of course paraphrasing a lot, the situation has changed in terms of the amount of international focus and attention to what is happening in the region and the amount of dynamics with regards to things happening around us, by us, and at us, aimed at Israel. And I'll name a few things. First and foremost, Iranian deployment in Syria. There should be no confusion, and the previous speaker spoke about it a bit, and I think it cannot be overstated. The threat that we perceive from Iran and their aggressive posture, their attempts to establish offensive military capabilities inside Syria, and their attempts to transfer high-tech weaponry from Iran via Iraq through Syria and then eventually into Lebanon. The Prime Minister spoke about it at the UN General Assembly a week or so ago. We followed up with additional intelligence about where Hezbollah is hiding conversion facilities in southern Beirut, very close to the Rafik Hariri International Airport, by the way, a few hundred meters away from the runway. And today the situation is of not really a threat from a maneuvering military belonging to the Syrian armed forces. They are busy doing other things and trying to reorganize, but still a significant threat from Hezbollah, more than 120,000 rockets aimed, all of them at Israeli civilians, many of them hidden behind Lebanese civilians, and basically a Hezbollah basically having full control over, or not full control, but a lot of control over the Lebanese state. On the Golan, today we marked the reopening of the Kuneta border crossing between Israel and Syria, which facilitates the transport of UNDOF, the UN forces there on the Golan, between Israel and Syria. That's a significant milestone. It has been closed since August 14 and opened just today, and that indicates a return to the previous situation which we had before, and perhaps a return to a more stable situation with regards to Syria. In the near future, maybe Syria will be able to regain control of its borders, but Iran and other very hostile actors remain within Syria, and they are a significant concern for us. In the south, there has been a lot of fighting between Egyptian security forces and Daesh, the last real active ISIS entity in the Middle East. There's still a few entities in Africa, but ISIS is more or less defeated here. They had or still have a presence here who haven't really attacked Israel, but not for lack of trying. They're just busy fighting for their own survival and are really fighting a hard battle against the Egyptian security forces, who are making gains and reestablishing the situation, but a significant threat exists here as well. The last panel spoke about Gaza. And I'll only add to what was said before about the current situation, the complexity, the threat that is perceived from there, by saying that I'll say a few words about Hamas's decision making. An important milestone was October the 30th, 2017. That is when we, the IDF, were able to detect and destroy a Hamas tunnel, a terror tunnel that was dug from inside Gaza for 2.5 kilometers under our fence into Israel. It was the first tunnel that we destroyed since 2014, but since we have destroyed 14 more. So the total is 15. That has been made possible by new technological developments. We now have a system in place where we can detect and destroy tunnels either from the air or with the ground troops. Now, why is that important? Because that was, together with the rockets and mortars that Hamas have, really the biggest terror leverage that Hamas used to have on the Israeli population living close to the border. Once we were able to take that away from Hamas, or to destabilize their capability to rely on those terror tunnels, that forced Hamas to rethink their strategy and to focus their activity differently. And what happened a few months after that? Passover 2018, Hamas started with what in many places in the international media unfortunately is still referred to as protests, but what we see are very violent riots and attempts to attack and infiltrate into Israel by using Gazan civilians, launching themselves at the fence, trying to dismantle security infrastructure in order to breach our defenses and get inside Israel. We have been going now for more than 7 months, every Friday from the 30th of March 2018 until today, every Friday and a few other days in between. I'm sure you'll remember May, the 14th of May this year, with the opening of the American Embassy in Jerusalem, was a key, was a milestone. And that is really, when you think about and when you read about what's happening in Gaza, this is Hamas acting differently, choosing a different strategy and tactics, understanding that their military capabilities are very limited, and choosing to do things differently in order to still focus attention and to draw media attention and political attention to what's happening inside Gaza, with no other success to their name. They've been ruling Gaza for more than 11 years and have very little to show for it. I could speak, of course, a lot about what's happening in Yemen, also an Iranian, a result of Iranian intervention and their export of instability and violence. I could speak about Iraq, what happened in Iraq and what the Iranians are doing there, and I could speak more about Hezbollah. But I would just summarize this slide by saying that the security situation that we face is a complex one. The IDF really quite uniquely, as a military, quite uniquely needs to deal with the lowest level of violence. Today was another stabbing attempt in a junction not far from Jerusalem. A Palestinian tried to stab an Israeli woman. 2 soldiers who were there were able to neutralize and shoot him before he was able to stab anyone. This happened just a few hours ago. So on the lower end of the spectrum, we deal with the lone attackers, the stabbers. On the higher end of the spectrum, we need to be able to deal with ballistic missiles and the possibility of a nuclear Iran, and everything in between. So counterterrorism, maneuvering forces, stationary forces, guerrilla, terror inside cities, in open terrain, in the mountains and in the desert. and tunnel warfare. That is the introduction to my, when I speak about the media environment and where we fight. It's important to have that in mind once we think about what we do. In terms of the IDF spokesperson unit, we're a unit of approximately 500 men and women deployed into different branches. I apologize that it's too far and too many small icons, lack of, I didn't think that through good enough, but I'll just say that we're part of the general staff. We receive our orders directly from the chief of staff, and we have essentially 3 missions, and I will explain it with this slide. Our mission, the first and most important mission, I'm sure many of you know that the IDF is a conscript military. We still have mandatory military service in Israel. We rely on almost all, or a very large part of all of the 18-year-olds in Israel to serve, and therefore it is vital that we have the public trust, the Israeli domestic public trust. Surveys are done on this, of course. There are independent polls of different Israeli institutions, and we continuously, over many, many decades, are rated with an approval rating, equivalent of an approval rating, of above 90%, by far the highest level of trust of any Israeli institution that, or how it is trusted by the Israeli public. That is the first and most important part of our job. The second part is to strengthen the legitimacy of IDF's activity and also to deter the enemy. We do so with, of course, engaging with different audiences. The first and the primal one, the most important one, the Israeli audience, and then we speak to the world, with the world, different audiences across the world. That is my branch. We do that, and then we have an Arabic-speaking spokesperson whom I will show in just a second. Now, with that comes a challenge, because when we, based on our mission, we of course have to tailor our messages to 3 different audiences with different goals and perspectives. Now you'll be able to appreciate that when an event happens, the concerns for the Israeli public, for the mothers and fathers in Israel, they want to know that their sons and daughters are safe, that they're being taken care of as soldiers, and that they can trust in the IDF, in the commanders and the decision making, that they are well equipped and well prepared for whatever mission we have. Many times we would want to project to the Israeli public a lot of strength, so that the Israeli public continues to trust and believe in what the IDF does, and that we are ready for any challenge that we're going to meet. On the other hand, towards the international audience, we don't necessarily want to project the strongest image that we can. We will definitely want to emphasize other aspects of our activity, not only how powerful, how fast, the capabilities we have, the intelligence, etc., etc. But then on a third side, vis-a-vis the Arabic-speaking audiences, and not all of them are enemies, but I am paraphrasing here, we would want to deter. We would want to send a strong message of deterrence, highlighting our capabilities, highlighting the price of aggressing against Israel. And you can see that there is a tension between these 3 different audiences, a tension that is becoming even more challenging, because the panel here of journalists before will tell you that Anshel Pfeffer writes for Haaretz, but he writes in English. Out of the 250 foreign correspondents who are permanently positioned here in Israel, most of them will go to Haaretz and refresh the homepage of Haaretz for their daily Israeli news, right? Haaretz, as the gentleman in the back from the UK pointed out, or it was someone before, has a certain editorial agenda, as other newspapers have different agendas, which is fine and totally acceptable. However, when the international media, the lines between domestic media and international media are becoming ever more difficult to detect, while we still have to be able to communicate different messages to different audiences in real time, and to try to get them across for different purposes. So that's one of the challenges we deal with on a day-to-day basis. we are and what we do. The lower part here are the different social media platforms that the IDF operates or maintains in different languages. I'll start with what I haven't spoken about before, the Arabic language. For those of you who speak Arabic, you probably are familiar with Major, soon-to-be Lieutenant Colonel I.D.F, who is brilliant. He is a master of the Arabic language and understands Arabic tradition, scriptures, norms and culture, and is able to communicate via his social pages and directly to the Arabic-speaking media, all of the large networks, as well as Lebanese, Syrian, Palestinian media outlets, and really is a rare, I would call him a national asset. I'll give a few examples of the type of activity that Avichai is part of. Last week, when the Prime Minister revealed the Hezbollah facilities in southern Beirut, the conversion factories where they're converting rockets into guided missiles, we of course launched a campaign in order to focus Lebanese media attention to the threat that Hezbollah poses to public safety in southern Lebanon. And the point man for doing this was Avichai, where he used his social media platforms, of course with intelligence and graphics that we have provided in advance, and he made sure to keep that topic on the public agenda in Lebanon, and forced really Hassan Nasrallah to deal with it and to say that we are not hiding dangerous weapons inside populated communities in southern Lebanon. And there are many, many other examples, but that is Avichai Adraei. You can see the size of the platforms that we have. The IDF spokesperson is Brigadier General Ronen Manelis. He is our boss and is he really focuses on the domestic audience. And as we said before, that is the prime audience. Since we're an international forum here, then I'll speak about what we do vis-a-vis the international audience. You can see highlighted are the amount of followers in each platform in the English language, but we also hold French and Spanish platforms in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and we also have 3 websites in those same languages. So there's a very strong, dedicated effort to get our message out. We are very much aware of what you spoke about the last panel, the challenges in getting our message out and overcoming a lot of bias in the traditional media. One of the ways of doing that is by producing original content by yourself and making sure that that content gets out via social media platforms. And our platforms are growing. They are on par with the Prime Minister's platform. However, we do not sponsor content. All of our followers are organic growth. We have not paid a cent in order to get followers, but all of those followers we have are organic. The average reach on the accumulative reach by week is approximately 3.5 individual viewers of the different content that we produce each week, which for Israeli standards is very big, probably the biggest.
What's that number again?
3.5 million.
Oh, I didn't hear the million.
Oh, did I say 3.5? Thanks for the correction. Important one. Would be quite shameful. Okay, we're expanding our YouTube footprint. We have a Telegram channel. We will soon open an English one as well. And as I said, we have the websites, which are less news sites, but more repository of information, longer articles, which you can follow if you're, or look up if you're interested. Now a little bit about the challenges. You spoke, this will be a bit redundant, and I'll go shortly through it and I'll make time for questions, because you spoke about it in the previous panel about Gaza. These pictures, all of them are taken from recent events. The first clash on March the 30th, 2018, when Hamas started to understand that they're changing their strategy and started to use the population in order to infiltrate into Israel. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with this young lady, Miss Tamimi, and her public efforts. And another challenge, which is still ongoing, and she's here as a symbol. This was a medical volunteer in Gaza, a 21-year-old young woman who unfortunately was shot as part of the riots in the southern Gaza Strip on the 1st of June 2018, and she became quite a symbol. The lady from camera spoke about the New York Times. The New York Times and many others really catapulted her to the front and really made a symbol and really she personifies a lot of the challenges that we deal with, which on a human perspective, right, as human beings, and as Michael Dixon from Stand With Us said, every human being, every father, mother, sees suffering in Gaza, sees people who have their legs amputated, sees people who don't have fresh water, and feels compassion. Israeli soldiers defending the border feel compassion. We feel compassion, and we have no interest in the situation being as it is, but our primary goal is to defend our border and our civilians, which are just a few hundred meters away. So whenever there's a dilemma, inconvenient as it may be, we make sure that, based on the first slide that I showed, we have a clear sight of the aim, what we are here to do, and for the Israeli soldiers on the ground, it's very clear. If we don't hold the line and defend, then these masses, these mobs of hateful people will come in and will seek to kill Israeli civilians. It is that clear, and it makes it very clear for the Israeli soldiers what they have to do. In a media perspective, this is challenging. To deal with the international media when there are symbols like this is a challenge. What we try to do is to use many different opportunities to try to focus positive attention on the many, many positive things that the IDF does and is part of. We try to highlight Operation Good Neighbor, our humanitarian assistance efforts to Syrian civilians that we did for more than 3.5 years, during which we provided emergency medical care to more than 5,000 Syrian civilians. Brought them in from Syria, treated them in Israeli hospitals until they were fully recovered, and returned them back to Syria with medication, with, in cases it was needed, prosthetic devices, etc., etc., in addition to a massive humanitarian effort of transport of thousands of tons of fuel, food, clothing, and many other things. That operation has now ended, but I can say that this was really a unique humanitarian effort that the IDF did. We had a few partners as well, organizations from around the world, and if you have questions about it, I'll elaborate soon. This is a picture from an IDF delegation to Mexico a year and 2 months ago to the earthquake. So we obviously want to highlight those things. International cooperation, a picture from an exercise with the US European Command Forces who come here once in 2 years, and we conduct joint readiness exercises. American commitment to Israeli safety is really, Israeli security is really embedded, really shown here, and different events on the ground that we can afterwards deal with. This picture here, this is the remains of an Iranian UAV that the Revolutionary Guard tried to infiltrate into Israel on the 10th of February 2018. Now, if we compare this to this slide, obviously I would want to focus all day long on dealing with fighting a military. Fighting a military or an aggressor, Iranians that are approximately 1,000 kilometers, a little bit more than 600 miles away from home, crossing our borders and attacking Israel, being the belligerent side. So that case was a great example of us being there first, getting the information out, and really being able to influence media coverage. But in many other cases, that is very challenging, and if you have questions about it, I'll elaborate. Now, You spoke before about media bias. That is, for me, it's not a question whether there is a media bias. I see it, I feel it, I read it, I hear it every day. We will issue a statement and provide information, and in many of the different outlets, TV stations, newspapers, etc., we will either receive very limited coverage of our viewpoint, or it will be questioned, or it will be located within brackets, or many other things or techniques by which I can see that there is a clear bias in many times. This is an example of the so-called split screen between the opening of the American embassy and the other part of the screen, the riots in Gaza, and a few other examples of. I chose this one. This is that example there. That's a picture which was the front page of the New York Times, and also the front strip on AP, of a picture of an eight-month-old baby from Gaza that unfortunately died after one of the riots. And the Palestinians, Hamas, was very quick to try to say that she had died as a result of Israeli tear gas. Only afterwards, and after we questioned that narrative, it became apparent, and the Palestinians eventually admitted that she had a pre-existing heart condition and died of other causes. Did we see a retraction? Did we see a correction? No. But it was the headlines, and of course a moving human story, but it wasn't true at the time. I'll give a few examples of the positive things that we're capable of doing. Again, an example of how on CNN, which many times gives fair coverage, in some cases we have issues about it, but more than usual fair coverage. We're able to follow here the saving of the white helmets through Israel, and a few other examples of events where the bottom line here, what I want to say is that positive media coverage is possible. It doesn't come easy and it doesn't come cheap. When we have an extremely good story which doesn't interfere with any pre-existing editorial line or ideas, then sometimes it also gets out, and sometimes it gets out the way we want it. And these are a few examples of that case. I think we've spoken a lot about the riots in Gaza. These are part of the weapons that are being used, and I wanted to show the different types of weapons, not AK-47s and not machine guns, but definitely weapons that are used by the Palestinians, organized, administered, paid for, and equipped by Hamas. And this is hugely underreported. You will read about such and so many Palestinians killed in protests against on the border against Israel, but you won't read, or maybe in the 5th or 6th paragraph in small font, what they brought and what they did and what that protest looked like on the ground. And these are just examples. Every Friday night when we go over the area and clear whatever is left of that night's riots, we find dozens of IDs, of standard grenades, of course remains of Molotov cocktails, etc., etc. We do cooperate. Eric left, but you can't mistake him. So we do try to seek out media outlets that we can cooperate with, no matter size or location, and we're always eager to do positive things, whether it is great coverage of the Golan Heights that was done. I think you did a great piece on the humanitarian effort on the Golan Heights, how Syrians receive inpatient treatment, a cooperation between the IDF and a American Christian relief organization. There are a few examples of that happening. Not enough, in my opinion, and more needs to be done. But again, the end of what I would want to the message that I would want to give.
Sometimes we need to stop for a moment. Look at our hands. Remember what they're capable of. And get started. Our hands lead us to our victories. Some of them are small, some of them are large, but they're all significant because we all know it's all in our hands.
So that is the message that I came here to say. The bottom line, yes, challenging times, a very complex security situation, many enemies around us with capabilities and hostile intentions, and a challenging time many times in international media. However, we very much believe that it is in our hands to defend ourselves and also to get the truth out and to have our voice heard in the international media. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to.
One question about you are giving the aid and help to the so-called enemies. What is the reaction of them when you give them the help?
You're from Norway?
No, from Finland.
From Finland?
Yes.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. So, I was actually on the Golan Heights in 2011 to 2013. I was there as a liaison officer of the IDF to UN peacekeeping forces, UNDOF. There weren't any Finnish officers there at the time, but the Finns do send officers to peacekeeping. And when the first Syrians started coming across, crossing the border from really a war zone inside Syria, came to the fence because it was their last resort, and asked for water, food, or came with a bleeding or wounded child, you could really see the fear in their eyes. You could see generations of hatred and indoctrination. You could see, you can't read thoughts, but you could really feel that they thought that maybe we have horns on our heads and that we're going to drink blood of the kids and use it for Pesach, for Seder. That level of hatred and blind indoctrination. As time went by, and it happened quite quickly. You saw more and more civilians who came forward without fear, and a few, not many, but a few were also brave enough to go on record in Arabic and also in English and say, I am from such and such area, not their name and the village, that would be dangerous, but I am from such and such area. I came to the Israelis, they saved my life, they saved my family, and I thank them. Now, that happened a few times, not too many times, when the IDF was part of facilitating the rescue of the white helmets from Syria. We, based on an American, Canadian, German, and a few other countries who were involved in it, request, together with Jordan, allowed the besieged white helmets to escape through the Golan Heights, through the Quneitra area, into Israel, via buses to Jordan, and from Jordan to different countries in the West. When that was over, I checked out the official White Helmets Twitter handle and was waiting, to retweet them saying thank you for saving our lives. It didn't come, but that we still know when we do good things, and many times we do very good things. We know what is right, and we know that we have done what is right, saved many lives. It would be great to have those things accredited as well, not only other things, but it is a step that I think will happen in the future as well.
Thank you.
Sir, in the front. And then...
Hello, Jonathan. Chris Mitchell with CBN News. Do you see that the enemies of Israel, like Hezbollah, Hamas, try to manipulate the international media as part of their strategy against Israel, and perhaps manufacture events or utilize events like that?
I think in the book that you wrote about ISIS, Iran, and Israel, you allude to the nature of terrorist organizations and their savvy and manipulation of the media as part of their modus operandi. Hezbollah and Hamas, I would give more credits to Hezbollah, but also Hamas, that is what they do. They conduct acts of violence and almost always make sure that these acts of violence will be amplified by the media in order to achieve a political goal. What has changed, what I spoke about in the briefing, is that Hamas today uses their civilians, the Gazan civilians, as they sacrifice them in order to get international attention in an attempt to change the political situation. So they've gone from doing suicide bombings in Israeli cities. Once we built the barrier in Judea and Samaria, they were no longer able to get into Israel and blow themselves up in Israel and to kill Israeli civilians. They started firing rockets. We developed the Iron Dome. Now they have a difficulty in doing that and getting an effect. They started with the tunnels. Now we've cut off those tunnels. So they've degenerated themselves or their current resort is to try to use this type of really media operations and very cynical manipulation of their own civilians, and I'd say a certain willingness in international media to play along. Yeah. So yes. Yes, sir.
DemocracyBroadcasting.com. We're familiar in North America with the tours of Breaking the Silence. IDF veterans who claim, in contradiction to Colonel Richard Kemp, who claims that the IDF is the most humane army in modern warfare, they claim ethics violations. What's the truthfulness of this group? What's their motivation, and what's your position on them?
We're a democratic country. We're a free society, and that is exactly how Israel, in our opinion, of course, should remain. And those are things that we cherish. Part of a free society is free speech, even when it isn't convenient. That's the general statement. The problem with Breaking the Silence, and I could name other organizations, in my view, is that instead of taking their criticism to the IDF and informing the relevant commanders in the IDF of any alleged wrongdoing, their go-to strategy or tactics is to go out of Israel and to try to generate criticism or to apply pressure on Israel from outside. We think that much more could be done, and the situation could be much better if organizations like Breaking the Silence with Others would present whatever evidence or allegations they have to the IDF, let us review it, and then act upon it. We have a proven track record of investigating and, when needed, of also charging our soldiers when someone was found in the wrong, unlawfully using their weapons or whatever it may be. And I have complete confidence in our ability to do so, and I think that is what these organizations should be doing, instead of seeking different venues around the world and really aiding organizations and entities that have a much more sinister aim for Israel than improving the morality of the IDF.
But are all their allegations valid?
No, I wouldn't say so. I would say that there are many allegations that we have looked into after we learned about them in the media. We looked into, investigated them, and found them far from the truth. But we would have done the same investigation had they come forward and said, listen, we think that this such and such happened, we got a report from whomever, please look into it. We would look into it. Yes, ma'am? Oh, yeah? Yeah.
First of all, it's an honor to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for your mic.
Wait 1 second for the mic. Can't hear. Yeah, we'll get the mic to her.
I will ask a very interesting question. Okay, so we hear so much about Iran, and you mentioned a lot about Iran. And so can I first of all say that Operation Good Neighbor, it was a very successful thing, both in the West, but I actually know Syrian people in South Syria who told me how they were very touched and how it really meant a lot to them. And these are obviously Syrian pro-Israel people, and they were happy to see other people being touched by this initiative. But anyway, my question is that we hear a lot about Iran, and we all understand here why. We don't hear so much about Turkey's role in delegitimizing Israel, and specifically about President Erdogan's efforts in the Islamic Cooperation Organization to bring together armies or bring together a team to what he calls defend Jerusalem, which we all know what it means. So I was wondering whether you have a position on that?
Yeah, I think that it wouldn't, I mean, I appreciate your question. I think it's a valid one, but I'll have to be a bit evasive because it isn't my job to be speaking about Turkey. You would probably get a better answer from either the Minister of Strategic Affairs or from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I can speak about Iran because Iran is an enemy country that is conducting hostile enemy activity against Israel. Therefore, it is my business as a military. With regards to what you asked, I'd rather not elaborate, with all due respect. Thank you.
Jonathan, Eric
Sure.
Stackelbeck, good to see you again. Eric Stackelbeck, TBN and Kufi. Two-part question. Number one.
Before you went out and refreshed yourself, I said that if I ever leave my job, you'll do it better than me.
Oh, gosh, so you two, Toda Rabah, Toda Rabah. That's a tough act to follow. Jonathan, let me ask you, I've been up north with you in recent months. Number one, tell us about this recent delivery of the S-300 anti-aircraft system from Russia to Syria. Is that a game changer? Number one, does that make things more difficult for the IDF, obviously, to strike against Iranian and Hezbollah targets? Secondly, I feel like we can't talk about Iran without talking about its most lethal proxy, Hezbollah. Could you tell us a bit about Hezbollah's strength level right now? And it seems like they've gained a lot of fighting experience on the ground in Syria.
Right. So the S-300, not really a surprise. It's been in the making for quite some time. I will focus my answer in a very short sentence. The IDF will continue to implement Israeli government policy, and we will continue to defend our strategic interests. The second part about Hezbollah, I don't know how many of you know, Hezbollah lost approximately 750 combatants, people that were trained to use weapons in the Second Lebanon War against Israel. They have lost, according to our assessments, around 3,000 combatants, operatives. I don't give them the honor of calling them soldiers because that's a totally different level of moral and ethics. But they have lost almost 3,000 combatants fighting in Syria, many of them in Deir Azur, Raqqa, and other places that are hundreds of kilometers away from Syria. Now that has come at a price for Hezbollah. Many bereaved families ask, is this what I send my son from southern Lebanon or from the Bekaa Valley to do? Is he there to do the heavy lifting and the dirty work and the war crimes at the behest of the Assad regime or Iran? Or is Hezbollah the so-called the defender of Lebanon, as they claim and they try to brand themselves to be? So there are many challenges for Hezbollah: how to replenish weapons, how to fill the lines again, how to train these the new recruits, and to maintain morale. I would say that they have gained a few important pieces or important things. They have now been exposed to and been part of maneuver warfare, which, for those of you who are not from the military, it's like the major league of military operations, right? The little league would be to defend static positions, but really to be able to maneuver, to conduct operations in enemy terrain is really indicates of elevated military capabilities. And Hezbollah has had an opportunity to fight alongside Syrians, other mercenaries in Syria, to see how air fire is coordinated and conducted, logistics, intelligence, etc. That, of course, is excellent experience for Hezbollah. Hezbollah would be very ill-advised to think that newly gained experience would be a match to the IDF. Whereas in the past they have been successful in using the local civilian infrastructure for their military purposes. All of the logistics were from within the villages. Their fire was conducted from within the houses, so they didn't have to really move things about. Most of their missiles are still located hidden behind civilians. But we're at an interesting situation where Hezbollah, we see that they're toying with the idea of maybe should we try to maneuver into Israel. We're not relying only on the good understanding and their instincts of self-preservation, Hezbollah. We're also, of course, preparing our forces, collecting intelligence at very high levels and detail of Hezbollah, and we're also building new infrastructure, defensive infrastructure along the border to make sure that at those places where there is a tactical, geographical weakness, we're able to add layers of security so that there's a hard obstacle between Hezbollah on one side and Israeli civilians on the other against these new capabilities that Hezbollah has.
All right, we have time for one more question. So.
Okay. That's an interesting. Sorry, in the front. Sorry.